Hello and welcome to another episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm your host, Hayleigh Hayhurst. I am the owner of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency specializing in editing, marketing, and strategy. And also the creator of 2 courses, Great Guesting, How to Be an Unforgettable Podcast Guest, and Great Hosting, How to Prepare for your guests and get the most out of your interviews. It is July, and around this time of year, I like to follow up with some of the people who reached out to me to start their podcast back in December or January or February or when we were planning our 2022. And what I find is they aren't ready to start their podcast maybe at the beginning of the year, and they're like, I'll do it soon. Okay, it's coming, whatever. And then we get 7 months into the year and they still don't have a podcast. They still haven't launched that course. They still haven't started their business. And we hold ourselves back by doing things like this. We hold ourselves back by thinking that we can do it tomorrow or next week or when something calms down or the holidays are crazy, let's launch in March. And then it just gets delayed and delayed and delayed. I'm guilty of this sometimes too. It's not just the listeners of this episode who really, we're all guilty of this. I'm sure every single one of us has put something off and we're thinking let's do it tomorrow, whatever it is. So today I wanted to talk to you guys in this solo episode about the 5 things to remember when starting a podcast. So these are just 5. Some of them are mindset things. Some of them are actual tips for the technology piece and the marketing piece. But this episode is designed to just get you started with the podcast. Your podcast, when it first launches, you just have to launch it. You just have to get it out there. You just need to get it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you want it to play. Maybe you want a video podcast, YouTube. You just need to get started with a trailer and a description. Okay. And then from there, you'll see how easy it is. You'll see how motivated you are, to start doing those interviews or start getting those episodes recorded. You will see what it's like once you actually see your podcast listed on streaming services. It's really, really, really an empowering moment. When I was launching my podcast, or even before I was launching my podcast, I was still doing podcast production for other people. And I kind of had this imposter feeling of how am I coaching other people on their podcasts when I myself don't have an active podcast. I've had podcasts in the past. I've been podcast guests on so many countless podcasts. But when I first started my business, I didn't have this Employee to Boss podcast. And it took me a minute to launch it. And I wish I launched it sooner. We're on episode 31 today, and that's just incredible, right? And so really, I wish I did it sooner. And I want you to do it sooner than later so you don't have that feeling of, when am I going to do it? What's holding me back? It's easier than you may think. One of my reels on Instagram, Espresso Podcast Production, that actually got more popular than the rest, got a lot more views. I want to say it got around 5,000, 6,000 views or so, was just the simple one. And it was breathe in, breathe out. And the caption I put on was when you finally launch your first episode of your podcast. It's such a relief. And I think a lot of people get more stumped on the part of actually doing it than actually when it's going. We can talk ourselves out of it time again, but once it's actually there, it's pretty easy to keep up with. You pick a format that works for you once a week, twice a month, once a month, whatever your podcast is. I have clients that do seasons. They do 15 episodes and they take a break. One of my most favorite podcasts is called The Financial Feminist, and it's by Tori. She owns the business Her First 100K. Her first season, I think she had 10 episodes or something. She did a season, and then she just launched season 2 and she's doing it ongoing. So she saw what it was like the first time around in season 1 and then loved it so much, she was like, okay, we're doing this weekly. So let's get right into 5 things to remember when you're starting a podcast. And through this, if you have any questions, send me a message on my website, my brand new website, by the way, espressopodcastproduction.com. You can send me a DM on Instagram, Espresso Podcast Production, or you can send me an email, hello@espressopodcastproduction.com. So number 1 that I want you to remember when you're starting a podcast is you don't need everything all at once. You, of course, need your podcast art, your description, your trailer, your plan. You have to have a strategy, right? But you don't need to have like the most beautiful podcast art when you're launching. I created my podcast art on Canva, and I'm probably going to hire a designer next to get a more professional podcast art. I love what I have, but, maybe it's time for change. I just got a new logo, and so just things like that. You can transition that. You can change your podcast music. You can change your intro. You can change your outro. You can always change these things, but you just need to put something out there. Of course, keep it professional, keep it on brand, make it look good, because this is your first impression with your potential audience, but it doesn't need to be the end-all be-all. What you launch with does not need to be what you have forever. So just remember that you don't need to do everything at once. This is big on like websites. You don't need a website for your podcast until you want to start, making it more of a business, making it more of a brand. And so when you first launch, don't let a website hold you back. That's like my biggest pet peeve. Do not let having a website hold you back. Instagram is enough, okay? Whatever platform you want, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever your audience is, that's good to start with. Number 2, this is more on the marketing side. You're building a brand. Act like it and present yourself like a professional. So this goes along with what I just said, right? You don't need to be the most not everything needs to be perfect. It doesn't need to be like crisp. That can be what you're working towards. But you do need to act like a professional. You do need to act like you're taking your podcast seriously. You can create your graphics and logo and all of these things on Canva, but make it look professional. Put time into it. When I launched my podcast, I spent time planning what I wanted everything to look like, but then I also spent time making sure it looked like how it looked in my head. There's so many podcasts out there, and I talked about this on last week's episode with Janelle. There's so many podcasts out there. It's not necessarily hard to start a podcast, but to get that traction, to become the expert that you are, to be seen as the expert, you really need to make sure that it looks like you're putting in the effort. There's a lot of podcasts that start off just looking not professional. Okay, I don't want to be mean, but there's a lot of podcasts out there that just, they put no effort into their marketing. They're like, oh, people will come listen to us. No, people will not just come listen to you. You have to put in the effort. And so to stand out from other podcasts, you need to look more professional. You need to look more intriguing to them. You just need to look more put together and present yourself like you're not on episode 1. Present yourself like you've been thinking about this forever and, put time and effort into it. Look better than the competition, I think is what I'm trying to say. Look better than the competition. Look at who the other podcasts are that are ranking in your industry. No matter what your industry is, do some market research and see what's working and what the bottom line is. When I first started my first podcast, it was a pro wrestling podcast with my friend Lo. It was called Wrestling Wind Down. And we were doing our market research of wrestling podcasts, and oh my, there was not a lot of competition out there, especially, there weren't a lot of women talking about it. And so we really came into the niche with great marketing, great graphics, everything looked really nice, and we gained like a big audience really fast just because we put in that extra effort to look good and look like we took it seriously. Number 3, interviews are great, but you have to be confident behind the microphone by yourself. It takes confidence to start a podcast. It really does, and I won't deny that. And sometimes it's easy just to be able to put out interview episodes after interview episodes, but it's really impressive to have your own solo episodes. I work with entrepreneurs and business owners. If you're only doing interview episodes as a business owner, people are not going to know what you do. Okay, you need to put in some solo episodes about yourself, about your mission, about your business, about all of this. And be confident behind the microphone because that will stand out. This will get your audience to understand really who you are. Use your voice. Use it for good. Use it to make you money. Make it personal to you. I was writing a post earlier and I gave the analogy of imagine you're trying to hire a copywriter and you find a copywriter, 2 copywriters, both with the same amount of experience in copywriting. One of them has an Instagram where they share a lot of like valuable content. And then the other one has an Instagram where they share similar valuable content, but then they also have a podcast that they can talk to you about it. They get on there weekly and share copywriting tips. They interview other copywriters. They really like talk about how copywriting can change your business in podcasts, okay? You're probably going to hire the one with a podcast because you're able to really connect with them more, hear more about them, and really like learn about them. That's a big thing about being in the service provider industry. There's a lot of competition out there. And so if you can stand out and share more about like your personality, inject your personality into your podcast and your business, and you will be getting more clients than the person who is only sharing maybe informational graphics. Show off your face. Let people connect with you. That's one of the things that I'm really great at. When I get on calls with people, I make the conversation memorable. I make sure that they are enjoying the conversation. I'm making sure that they are engaged in the conversation. I'm not all about business. I'm a very, very laid back person. And so I want my audience and my potential clients to understand that. I have a lot of value to share, but I also want them to understand that like I'm a person and I will care about your business and I'll care about your podcast and I'll want you to succeed. And I don't think I could personally share all of this in some Instagram posts. The next part is don't forget about your audience, but don't get wrapped up with who they are and what they want. What I mean by this is know who you're speaking to. Know who this person is that's getting value from your episodes. And of course, create content for them, but don't let that hold you back. You know, when I was launching my podcast or when my clients launch their podcasts, if you want to do interviews, it can be kind of like stressful to be like, oh, I want to interview this person, but I don't know if my audience will love it. I don't know if my audience will really engage with this. Don't let this topic be so off course for you, but try out new things, especially when you're beginning. When you're starting a podcast, try out different things because you don't know who your audience is and you don't know exactly what they want. We can get on our heads and be like, oh, you know, for me, my intended audience is business owners who are maybe, you know, age 25 to 50 who want to start a podcast or have a podcast that they want to grow. And they could be men or women, but typically women. Okay, so that's, you know, who I'm speaking to. If I don't try out new things, that's a big industry. If I don't try out new things, I'm definitely not going to be able to reach as many people as I can. If I was only to interview women, I may not get the male audience that I have in my mind. And so I see this a lot with people who want to start getting sponsors for their podcast too. They think they know who they're talking to, but they don't really try new things, and they don't really look at their analytics and their statistics and see, like, is who they think they're speaking to the same as who they're actually speaking to. When you start your podcast, you'll get analytics from Apple Podcast Connect, and you'll be able to see actually who you're speaking to. And so don't forget about them, but don't get too wrapped up in not wanting to try new things because of who they are. Try new things. You can always grow your audience and get more. The last thing to remember when starting a podcast is always, always, always remember your why and know your mission. Remember why you started a podcast. Remember who you're starting a podcast for, and hopefully it's yourself. Remember your intentions. Is it to get more clients? Is it to hit the Apple podcast charts? Is it to be a world-renowned speaker one day? Whatever your mission is, don't forget about it, because you want to always stay on that track, and you want your marketing to stay on that track too. Your podcast, and I will say this over and over again, your podcast has to be more than just episodes. You are building a brand. You're building a whole brand, and so your social media marketing does matter. Who you're reaching out to does matter. Who you're reaching does matter. So remember why you're doing it, who you're doing it for, and what your mission is. And I really think that's key to growing a successful podcast. So those are 5 things to remember when starting a podcast. If you have any questions about this, just reach out to me. I'm always around to help. I know starting a podcast can be intimidating, but like I said in the beginning, we're 7 months into 2022. When are you going to start? Hopefully it's today. If you want to start today, you can download my podcast launch checklist on my website, espressopodcastproduction.com, and that'll help you out a lot with getting clear. So come connect with me on my website, Instagram, Facebook. My Facebook group is Espresso Growth for podcasters, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders. Come hang out with me on social media and let's get chatting. All right, I will talk to you all next week in an interview episode. Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.